"She's a drug addict," my father shouted across the courtroom. I stayed seated. Judge Kent looked at him, then at the exhibits in front of her. "Mr. Donnelly, are you sure you know what your daughter does?" Dad hesitated. "She works in compliance." The judge lifted one page. "And the treatment centers you listed as proof of relapse?" His lawyer stopped writing. Dad's face changed. "Those dates match her employer's site assignments." "Wait. No. 11 years earlier. I really had needed treatment, and my father had never stopped seeing that version of me. But what he didn't know was that his accusation wasn't just about my past anymore. It was hiding the reason he wanted me removed from the trust. At 23, I gave my father a reason to be afraid. What I never expected was that he would still be using that reason 11 years later. It started after knee surgery. The prescription was legitimate. The problem was what happened afterward. At first, I took the pain medication exactly as directed. Then I started taking it sooner than I should, then more than I should. Eventually, I knew I was losing control. My mother, Elaine, helped me find an outpatient treatment program. I completed it, stayed with follow-up care, and rebuilt my life slowly. There was no arrest, no overdose, no dramatic disappearance. Just a bad year I worked very hard not to repeat. Dad had seen the worst part of it. One night, he found me so sedated I could barely hold a conversation. For months afterward, he checked on me constantly. I understood why. What I didn't understand was why the fear never changed even after I did. By 34, I was a regional quality and compliance manager for a nonprofit behavioral health network in Kansas City. My job involved audits, incident reviews, documentation standards, privacy compliance, and site inspections. Some of those sites treated substance use disorders. Dad knew that much, but whenever I explained the rest, his attention drifted. He called it that rehab work. Over the years, there were no new substance-related incidents, no legal problems, no workplace issues. Still, if I looked tired at dinner, Dad noticed. If I canceled plans because of work, he noticed. If I seemed stressed, he noticed. He was always waiting for old evidence to return. Then my grandfather, Franklin, died. 18 months later, his estate documents were finalized, and I learned he had named me trustee of a family trust worth about $155 million. I remember Dad staring at me across the attorney's table. "You." It was only one word, but I knew exactly what he meant. Grandpa had trusted the woman sitting in front of him. My father was still looking for the 23-year-old he once drove to treatment. Grandpa Franklin's trust wasn't designed to make anyone rich overnight. After he died, roughly $155 million remained in a family trust meant to cover education, medical needs, reasonable support, and emergencies while preserving enough for future beneficiaries. I was named trustee. That didn't mean the money belonged to me. It meant I had to follow the document. I kept separate accounts, used a professional investment custodian, documented distributions, and sent the required reports. For 18 months, nothing dramatic happened. Then my older brother Patrick called. His 15-year-old son, Cal, had been accepted into an elite residential hockey academy. The full annual package was about $84,000. Patrick wanted the trust to cover all of it. I reviewed the request carefully. The academic tuition was legitimate, so I approved about $27,000. The rest covered housing upgrades, private coaching, travel, tournament fees, and the hockey development program itself. I declined that portion. Patrick stared at me across my kitchen table. "You're serious?" "Yes. Grandpa would have paid for this. Maybe." His face tightened. "Maybe. Grandpa left a trust because someday he wouldn't be here to answer that question." Patrick leaned back. "So now you decide what he would have wanted." "No. The trust does. That's convenient." I slid my written explanation toward him. "You can submit more documentation. You can ask me to reconsider specific expenses, but I'm not approving $84,000 because we all loved Grandpa." Patrick left angry. 2 days later, Dad called. "Your brother says you rejected Cal's school. I approved the school tuition. He says you're refusing the rest." I am. Dad went quiet in that way he did before deciding I was being difficult. Your grandfather didn't leave that money so you could treat family like applicants. I'm treating the trust like a trust. You always did like rules. I almost laughed. That's probably why Grandpa named me. He didn't find that funny. You're enjoying the control. No, I'm doing the job. Dad exhaled sharply. Saying no doesn't make you responsible, and wanting a different answer doesn't make me unfit. There was a pause after that word. Unfit. I didn't know then how seriously he would take it. A few weeks later, Dad saw me leaving Northgate Recovery Center after dark. I was there for work. He saw something else entirely. Northgate wasn't the only place Dad noticed. A few weeks later, Patrick mentioned seeing my car outside Riverside Medication Services. Then Dad drove past another outpatient facility and recognized me leaving through the employee entrance. 3 locations in less than 2 months. To him, that became a pattern. What he didn't know was that all 3 were part of my regional workload. Northgate had needed a quarterly compliance audit. Riverside was completing a corrective action review after a documentation issue. The 3rd site was preparing for an annual inspection. None of that mattered once Dad decided what he was looking at. He called me one evening. Why are you spending so much time at Northgate? Because Northgate is one of my sites. There was a pause. Are you getting treatment again? I closed my eyes. No. Kira, no. I'm working. You've been at 3 different places because I manage compliance across multiple facilities. You've also missed 2 family dinners for work. You look exhausted every time I see you. I have a job, Dad. His voice lowered. I've heard all this before. That was the sentence that ended the conversation. Not because he was right, because I realized there was no answer I could give that he hadn't already translated into something else. A month later, a process server handed me a court petition. Dad was asking the probate court to remove me as trustee. His attorney, Gavin Holt, had written the filing carefully. It didn't flatly declare that I was using drugs. It raised concerns about possible current substance misuse, impaired judgment, and whether I was still fit to administer the trust. The supporting facts included my old treatment history, my denied distribution decision, and a list of the treatment facilities Dad had seen me entering. I read that page twice, then a 3rd time. He had turned my work schedule into evidence against me. I hired Monica Velez, a trust litigator, the next morning. She read the petition without reacting. Were these treatment appointments? No. Any of them. Every single one was work. She looked up. Good. Then we proved that. Over the next 2 weeks, we gathered employer site assignments, trust account records, distribution memos, and everything relevant to my current fitness. Then Monica asked me one question. When did your father first start talking about replacing you? I thought back. Not after Northgate. Not after Riverside. It started immediately after I refused most of Patrick's $84,000 request. My past hadn't changed that spring. The answer I gave my brother had. The probate courtroom was smaller than I expected. No jury, no gallery packed with relatives, just Judge Kent, 2 attorneys, my parents, Patrick, and me. Dad testified first. Gavin kept his questions careful. He asked about my history at 23. Dad described the treatment program, the months when he worried about me, and the night he found me barely able to stay awake. Then Gavin moved to the present. Dad listed Northgate, Riverside, the 3rd outpatient facility. How often did you see your daughter at these locations, enough to know something was wrong? Gavin nodded. And did her behavior concern you? Yes. She was tired, missing family events, making decisions that didn't make sense. I knew exactly which decision he meant. Then Monica stood for cross-examination. Mr. Donnelly, have you personally seen Kira use an illegal drug in the last 10 years? No. Have you seen her impaired? Dad hesitated. Not exactly. Do you have a current medical diagnosis showing she has relapsed? No. Any missing trust funds? No. Any unexplained withdrawals? No. Any report from her employer that she was impaired at work? No. Dad's jaw tightened. Monica continued. So, your belief that she relapsed is based largely on seeing her at treatment facilities. She keeps going back to those places. And when Kira told you Northgate was one of her work sites, she always has an explanation. Was that explanation false? Dad's face reddened. I know my daughter. Monica waited. Dad looked directly at me. She's a drug addict. The words hit harder than I expected. I stayed seated. My hands were clenched beneath the table, but I said nothing. Judge Kent leaned forward. Mr. Donnelly, are you sure you know what your daughter does? Dad blinked. She works in compliance. Compliance where behavioral health. Judge Kent opened one of our exhibits. You identified Northgate Recovery Center as evidence that Ms. Donnelly may have returned to treatment. Yes, the judge looked down. According to her employer's records, she was assigned there that evening for a quarterly compliance audit. Dad stopped moving. Judge Kent turned another page. Riverside Medication Services. Dad swallowed. She was there twice. Both dates correspond to a corrective action review she was assigned to conduct. Gavin's pen stopped. He looked at Dad. Not at me. Dad's face slowly lost its color. Judge Kent continued. And the third facility you listed was scheduled for an annual compliance inspection on the date you observed her there. Dad stared at the documents. Wait. No. His voice was barely audible. I thought she meant she worked with those places. I didn't know she was actually. I'm asking what you knew, Judge Kent said. Not what you assumed. The courtroom went silent. For 1 second. I thought the case was over. It wasn't. Judge Kent closed the exhibit. Ms. Donnelly's occupation explains these visits. It does not, by itself, decide whether she is fit to continue serving as trustee. Monica stood and reached for the trust accounting. My father had just lost the story he brought into court. Now he had to prove the case that story was supposed to carry. Monica started with the part my father had never bothered to examine. The trust itself. For 18 months, every account had been kept separate. Every distribution was documented. The investments were held through a professional custodian. There were no unexplained withdrawals, no loans to myself, no missing money, and no evidence that I had ever used trust assets for anything outside the document. Then she addressed me. Any substance-related incident during the period you've served as trustee? No. Any workplace finding that you were impaired? No. Any current clinical finding that you are unable to perform your duties? No. We had submitted a limited independent evaluation addressing exactly that question. Nothing more than the court needed. Then Monica brought up Patrick's request, the $84,000. She showed the judge my written decision. Academic tuition approved. About $27,000. Private coaching, travel, premium housing, and hockey development expenses declined. Judge Kent read the memo. Patrick testified next. Monica asked him directly, "Did you want your sister removed as trustee?" He shifted in his chair. "Yes." "Because you believed she was using drugs?" Patrick looked toward Dad, then back at Monica. "Not at first. The room changed." "Why?" "Then I thought she was being too rigid." "With your son's request?" "Yes." "If you had been trustee, would you have approved the full amount?" "Probably." Monica nodded once, then she turned back to Dad. "Mr. Donnelly, your daughter completed treatment more than a decade ago, correct?" "Yes." "You knew that when Franklin named her trustee, yes. You knew it for the entire 18 months she administered the trust, yes." Monica paused. "Your daughter's history didn't change last spring." "Did it?" Dad looked at her. "No. The distribution decision did." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That was the first time the case stopped looking like fear alone. Dad may genuinely have worried about me, but he had only turned that fear into a legal weapon after I gave Patrick an answer neither of them liked. Judge Kent took a recess before ruling. When she returned, her decision was calm and brief. The petition to remove me was denied. My history at 23 did not establish present unfitness. The treatment center visits had been mischaracterized. There was no current evidence that substance use was impairing my judgment, and the trust records showed organized, documented administration. She also made one thing clear. A beneficiary disagreeing with a discretionary decision did not automatically make the trustee incapable of serving. There was no applause, no dramatic reaction. Patrick stared at the table. Dad looked older than he had that morning. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt exhausted. Outside the courtroom, I had almost reached the elevator when Dad caught up with me. "Kira." I stopped. His voice was quieter now. I was trying to protect the trust. I turned to face him. "No, Dad." He flinched. "You were protecting the version of me you already understood." Dad stared at me in the courthouse hallway. "I had reasons to worry. 11 years ago." "You did. I saw you at those centers. I told you Northgate was one of my sites." His mouth tightened. "I thought you were hiding behind your job." "That's the problem. You had already decided what every answer meant." He looked away. "You didn't ask whether I was doing the job well," I said. "You searched my past for a reason the job shouldn't count." I left before he could answer. Patrick called 3 days later. "I didn't tell Dad you were using again." "You didn't stop him either." "No. At least he didn't insult me with an excuse." "I wanted you removed," he admitted. "I thought another trustee would approve Cal's full request. So you let Dad turn my recovery into an argument." Patrick went quiet. "Finally," he said. "I let him use something ugly because I wanted a different answer. You weren't worried I couldn't manage the trust. You were angry I managed it in a way you couldn't control." "I know." That was as close to an apology as he had earned. Mom came to my apartment the following week. "I always knew you were doing well," she said. "That hurt more than I expected. Then why did you let him keep talking about me like I wasn't?" She looked down. I thought correcting him would only make him dig in, so I carried the version of myself that kept the peace. She had no answer. Dad waited almost a month before asking to see me. We met at a quiet diner for a long time. He stared at his coffee. Then he told me something I already knew but had never heard him say. "When you were 23, I found you barely responsive. I remember, for months afterward, I checked whether you were breathing when you slept." His voice cracked slightly. I kept thinking if I stopped watching for it, I'd miss it happening again, for the first time. I understood how fear had frozen me in his mind, but understanding wasn't forgiveness. "You watched so hard for who I used to be that you missed who I became." Dad closed his eyes. Then he nodded. "I used the worst year of your life as evidence against the next 11. He looked at me. "I was wrong, years earlier. I would have needed those words to fix everything. Now, I only needed them to be true." "I believe you mean that," I said. "I don't know what it fixes yet." He nodded again. Neither did he. 10 months later, I was still trustee. For unusually large family requests, I now involved outside trust counsel early, not because Dad had been right, but because one person shouldn't absorb every family conflict alone. Patrick stopped calling me for favors disguised as emergencies. Cal's school costs were handled through the tuition I approved, Patrick's own money, and a smaller scholarship package. Mom and I were rebuilding slowly. Dad and I were slower. One Sunday, someone at dinner asked what I did for work. Dad started with, "Kira works at rehab." Then he stopped. "She runs compliance across behavioral health facilities." It was such a small correction. 11 years earlier, I would have needed something bigger, an apology in front of everyone, proof that he finally understood. Now I just noticed that he had changed the sentence. The courtroom didn't erase my past. Dad's apology didn't erase what happened there either, but I no longer felt responsible for proving, over and over, that I wasn't 23 anymore. My father spent 11 years waiting for me to become my worst year again. I finally stopped waiting for him to notice that I never did. If you were in Kira's place, could you forgive a parent who kept judging you by the worst year of your life, even after you had spent more than a decade proving you had changed? And if you were Patrick, would you have spoken up sooner when that past was being used to get a different financial decision? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. I think this one raises a difficult question about recovery, family, and how long someone should have to keep proving they've grown. If this story stayed with you, please like the video and subscribe. I'd love to have you here for the next story.